She signed a contract with Millionaire to save her mother, but he discovered she was his first. Hello, my beautiful Mr. Hearthline family. Welcome home. Before anything else, I just want to say thank you. The love you poured into the last story was overwhelming. Did you enjoy it? If you did, tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear what part moved you most. And if you're new here, come closer. You're not just watching a video, you're stepping into a family that believes in healing, second chances, and stories that speak to the soul. Now, may peace fill your heart tonight. May love, however far it feels, find its way back to you. And if you're watching this with a heavy spirit, I pray this story brings you a little light, a little hope, and maybe a reason to believe again. Before we begin, I need a favor. Tap the like button. It helps YouTube share this story with someone who needs it. Drop a comment, even just a heart, so the Hearthline family keeps growing. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might be the one that changes everything. Now, let's get to it. Cassian Ward had learned to master silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that echoed in empty penthouses after midnight, when the world finally stopped pretending. He was 35, a man who had clawed his way from nothing to command Monarch Tower, a glass fortress that rose above New York City like a crown. Every room in that tower spoke of power, precision, and profit. But Cassian, he no longer trusted anything that glittered. 3 years ago, his marriage collapsed under betrayal so public it nearly destroyed him. The woman he thought he would grow old with had been secretly selling pieces of his company to a rival. When the scandal broke, Cassian divorced her with ruthless efficiency. But scars don't always heal clean. His board forgave him for trusting the wrong partner, but they never forgot. And now, with the company's biggest merger looming, they whispered again about stability, about appearance, about whether Cassian Ward could be trusted to lead alone. The board's ultimatum had been delivered like a knife disguised as advice. You need to remarry. Investors want to see steadiness. Without a family, Ward Enterprises looks vulnerable. He hadn't argued. Arguments wasted energy. Instead, Cassian summoned his legal team and told them to draft something practical. Not a romance, not a vow from the heart, but a contract marriage. Businesslike, unbreakable, designed to silence critics. She had never planned to step into his world. Leora was a financial analyst who thrived in back rooms with spreadsheets and logic, not in headlines or luxury towers. But her life was unraveling at a pace numbers couldn't fix. Her mother's illness required treatments insurance barely touched, and debt pressed on her like stone. Every option had collapsed, except one: survival. When Ward's lawyers approached her with an offer, marriage on paper, a generous settlement, protection from debt collectors, she hesitated. The idea sounded unthinkable, but then she thought of her mother's fragile smile, the nights she lay awake, wondering if tomorrow would bring another bill they couldn't pay. So she signed. The first time Leora saw Cassian in person was in his office, 20 floors up in Monarch Tower. The view stretched to the Hudson, the windows gleaming with late afternoon light. He stood with his back to her at first, shoulders squared, posture perfect, a man carved from iron. When he turned, she noticed the scar that ran faintly along his jaw, a reminder that not every wound could be hidden behind suits and glass. You understand this is an arrangement, Cassian said, voice deep, precise. Not romance, not affection. The contract is clear, Leora nodded, her fingers tightening on the folder in her lap. I understand, and I'll honor it. He studied her then, really studied her. Not her modest dress, not her nervous posture, but the steadiness in her gaze. She wasn't dazzled by him. She wasn't playing coy. She was here because she needed to be. Something about that unnerved him more than charm would have. The weeks that followed moved with mechanical precision. His assistants scheduled the ceremony, the lawyers revised clauses, the press releases were drafted. And through it all, Cassian and Leora spoke little beyond necessity. They were two signatures on a page, soon to be bound before witnesses. Yet beneath the silence, tension stirred. Cassian noticed how she carried herself, calm even when reporters swarmed outside Monarch Tower. He noticed the way she read contracts line by line, never skipping detail, never asking for favors. And Leora? She noticed him too. She saw the way he stayed at the office past midnight, the way his hands lingered on the edge of his desk as if work was the only anchor he had left. She caught glimpses of weariness in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. Neither spoke of it. Not yet. On the night before their wedding, Leora sat at her mother's bedside. The older woman, frail but sharp-eyed, reached for her hand. "Are you sure, Leora?" her mother asked softly. "This isn't love." Leora swallowed hard. "It's survival. And if it means you get the care you need, then it's worth it." Her mother squeezed her fingers. "Don't forget, survival isn't the same as living. Promise me you'll still leave space for your heart." Leora blinked back tears. "I promise." Across the city, Cassian poured himself a drink in his penthouse, staring at the skyline. He had once believed in vows, in forever. Now he believed in contracts. And tomorrow, he would sign the one that would shield his company from ruin. But deep inside, a quiet question stirred. One he hadn't asked in years. What if there was still something left of me to give? The clock struck midnight. Both bride and groom sat in silence, unaware that tomorrow's cold arrangement would become the spark that would rewrite everything. The wedding was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon, timed neatly between Cassian's board review and his evening flight to London. That was how the press release framed it. A private union, a quiet step toward stability for Ward Enterprises. In reality, it was nothing more than signatures and ceremony stitched together for optics. The ceremony took place in a discreet Manhattan hall rented under one of Cassian's shell companies. Reporters swarmed outside, desperate for a glimpse of the man who had once made headlines for his divorce scandal. The air buzzed with speculation. Who was this new bride? Was she another socialite, another heiress, or something else entirely? Inside, the atmosphere was almost clinical. The room had white walls, polished floors, and a single aisle lined with chairs. There were no flower arrangements, no music beyond the faint hum of strings played by hired musicians. It was the kind of event Cassian preferred, efficient, controlled, stripped of unnecessary sentiment. Leora entered in a simple ivory dress, not designer, not custom-tailored, but elegant in its restraint. She held no bouquet. Her hands trembled, but her steps were steady. The dress had been chosen for its modesty, yet in its simplicity, it made her unforgettable. Cassian stood at the front, clad in a dark suit, posture unyielding. He watched her approach without a smile, without warmth, only the steel gaze of a man who considered every moment a negotiation. But when their eyes met, something flickered. Curiosity, perhaps, or respect. The officiant, a city clerk with tired eyes, cleared his throat and opened a folder. His voice echoed through the quiet room. "We are gathered today." The words felt hollow to Cassian. He had stood in this place once before, years ago, with promises of love and forever. That day had ended in betrayal. This day, he told himself, would end in security. Leora's mind raced as the vows were recited. She was agreeing to bind herself to a man she barely knew. Not for love, not for dreams of family, but for her mother's life, for a chance at stability. Her voice shook when she repeated the words, but she forced them out, line by line. When it came time for Cassian, his delivery was flawless, sharp, calm, professional. He didn't waver, didn't falter. To anyone watching, he was simply a man completing a task. The rings were exchanged, plain bands chosen without sentiment. As he slid the ring onto her finger, Cassian's touch was brief, almost impersonal. Yet Leora felt a spark that startled her, a reminder that even contracts couldn't erase humanity. "You may kiss the bride," the clerk concluded. For the briefest moment, Cassian hesitated. He leaned in just enough for their lips to meet, nothing more than a brush, formal and restrained. Cameras flashed from the back of the room, capturing what the world would interpret as romance. Only they knew the truth. It was duty. After the ceremony, there was no reception, no champagne toast. The photographers were ushered out, and Cassian's driver opened the car door for them. The ride back to the penthouse was silent. New York's chaos muffled by tinted windows. Leora sat with her hands folded in her lap, the ring heavy on her finger. She stared out at the city, wondering if she had just buried her own freedom. Cassian, seated beside her, scrolled through his phone, responding to emails as if nothing monumental had just occurred. When they arrived, the penthouse greeted them with its familiar coldness: glass walls, steel fixtures, art chosen by decorators. No warmth, no lived-in clutter. It was a palace and a prison. "This is your home now," Cassian said simply, setting his phone down. Leora nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then Cassian studied her, his tone measured but edged with curiosity. "You're not like the women they expected me to marry," he said. She met his gaze carefully. "Is that a problem?" His lips curved into something almost like a smile, but too faint to be sure. "No, just unexpected." That night, they ate dinner together for the first time, not as husband and wife, but as strangers bound by paper. The table stretched long between them, filled with plates neither touched much. Their conversation was limited to polite exchanges, questions about schedules, nothing personal. Yet in the quiet, Leora felt the weight of possibility. Contracts could dictate terms, but they couldn't dictate the heart. She wondered, as she watched him retreat into his study, whether the man behind the iron walls might one day let her in. And Cassian, alone at his desk, wondered why her silence unnerved him more than words ever could. The contract was signed. The vows were sealed. The world saw stability. But inside Monarch Tower, two strangers had just begun a story neither of them expected to write. Monarch Tower thrived on whispers. Inside its glass walls, numbers weren't the only currency. Perception mattered just as much. And perception, as Cassian Ward well knew, could make or break an empire. Barely 2 weeks after the wedding, he was already sitting at the long, mahogany table of the boardroom, the city skyline sprawling behind him. The directors leaned forward in their seats, papers stacked neatly before them, but their eyes were fixed on him and, indirectly, on the woman who now bore his name. "Congratulations again, Cassian," one of the older board members said, voice smooth but probing. "We're all relieved to see stability in your personal life." The others nodded, some smiling too easily, others with clipped approval. Cassian felt the weight of their stares, as if his new marriage had already become part of the quarterly reports. He kept his tone cool. "Ward Enterprises will always remain stable. My personal life doesn't determine our growth." One of the directors chuckled dryly. "Investors think otherwise. They want to see a man settled, not a fortress at war with itself. Your marriage was the right move, Cassian. It reassures people." Reassures. The word left a bitter taste. His union with Leora was already being tallied in profit margins. Across town, Leora sat at her desk in the analyst division, carefully reviewing balance sheets. She had returned to work at his insistence, though now her colleagues regarded her differently. Conversations stopped when she entered the room. Eyes followed her. Whispers rippled in her wake. "She's the boss's wife. How did she land him?" "Gold digger, obviously." She kept her head down, ignoring the murmurs, letting numbers and data be her shield. Still, the weight of scrutiny pressed hard. It wasn't only the analysts. Even the secretaries glanced at her ring, then at one another, as if silently debating how long she would last. That evening, she rode the elevator up to the penthouse with Cassian. He stood beside her, silent, reading something on his phone. The quiet between them wasn't new, but tonight it felt heavier. Finally, she spoke. "They think I trapped you." Cassian looked up, brows tightening. "Who? Your employees? The analysts? Maybe even your board?" His expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened. "Let them think what they want. It's irrelevant." "It isn't irrelevant to me," she said softly. "I have to face them every day." For the first time in weeks, his phone went dark in his hand. He studied her, his jaw set. "If anyone disrespects you directly, you tell me." She shook her head. "That's not the point. You can't fight whispers with threats. They'll just talk more." Her quiet strength unsettled him again. She wasn't pleading for his protection, nor basking in the title of Mrs. Ward. She was simply naming the truth, standing in it, steady as stone. Cassian turned back to his phone, but his mind wasn't on the emails anymore. Whispers had destroyed him once before. This time, they were circling her. And though he didn't say it aloud, he felt the stir of something he hadn't expected, the urge to defend, not just to win. The penthouse perched above Manhattan like a crown, but to Leora, it felt more like a fortress. Every evening when she returned from work, the silence pressed down heavier than the skyline outside. Cassian Ward lived there as if it were a command post, papers stacked on the dining table, a laptop always glowing, his attention tethered to markets, mergers, and endless reports. Dinner became their ritual, though not the kind that brought people closer. The long marble table could seat 12, yet only 2 chairs were ever filled. Plates arrived under silver lids, meals prepared by chefs Cassian barely acknowledged. He ate with precise efficiency, like a man, fueling an engine. Leora, seated across from him, often picked at her food, her appetite dulled by the whispers she endured all day. Still, in the quiet moments between clinking cutlery and the hum of the city below, there were cracks. She noticed the way he rolled his sleeves to his forearms, the faint scar near his wrist, the way his eyes grew distant when her fork scraped against porcelain. She wondered if he was haunted or simply hardened. One night, exhaustion finally broke through her composure. Leora had stayed late at the office, cleaning up a report mistake not her own. By the time she returned, her legs trembled from weariness, her body begging for rest. She barely managed to reach the living room before her vision swam. Cassian caught her before she hit the ground. For a man who rarely showed emotion, the alarm in his face was undeniable. "Leora." His voice carried urgency she had never heard from him. He scooped her up with surprising gentleness and carried her down the hallway. She stirred faintly in his arms, murmuring, "I'm fine, just tired." "You're not fine," he said, jaw tight. He pushed open the door to a bedroom, hers separate from his, and laid her on the bed with deliberate care. For a moment, he hovered, torn between retreating and staying. His hand brushed her hair back, then froze as if the gesture betrayed too much. "You work yourself to the bone," he muttered. "You don't need to prove anything to them." Her eyes fluttered open. "I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm just surviving." The words cut deeper than she realized. Cassian stood there in silence, watching her, something softening in his expression. Then, almost reluctantly, he reached for the blanket and pulled it over her. "Rest," he said, voice lower now. "Tomorrow, I'll have someone adjust your hours. You don't answer to anyone but me." Her lips curved in the faintest smile, tired but genuine. "That's not how life works, Cassian." He said nothing, but lingered by the doorway longer than necessary before returning to his own solitude. For the first time since their vows, the walls of the penthouse didn't feel quite as unbreakable. The rain came without warning. One moment the city was buzzing with evening traffic, and the next thunder rolled. Across the skyline, heavy drops slamming against the glass walls of the penthouse. By nightfall, Manhattan blurred behind sheets of water, the storm drowning out even the hum of the city. The power flickered once, twice, and then went out entirely. For the first time since she'd moved into Cassian Ward's fortress in the sky, Leora saw it stripped of its glow. Emergency lights lined the hallways faintly, but the rest of the penthouse sank into shadow. Cassian lit a candle in the dining room, setting it at the center of the long table. The small flame painted the marble in gold, softening the edges of the man who always seemed carved from steel. Leora sat opposite him, hugging a sweater close. "You'd think a tower like this would never lose power," she said lightly, trying to break the tension. Cassian's mouth quirked faintly. "Money doesn't control storms." The silence after that was different, not sharp, not cold, but heavy with something unspoken. Without the usual distractions of glowing screens and endless emails, they were left with only each other. Leora shifted in her seat, her eyes catching the scar along his jaw in the flickering light. She'd wondered about it since the day they met. Tonight, the words slipped out before she could stop them. How did it happen? He glanced up, caught off guard. What? The scar, she clarified, voice quiet. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, to her surprise, he set down the glass in his hand and leaned back, the mask slipping just slightly. An accident, he said at first. Then, with a sigh, a car crash. Years ago. I was young, reckless. It should have killed me. Instead, it just reminded me that life doesn't always give second chances. His tone was calm, but his eyes held shadows. Leora studied him, her voice soft. And yet you built everything from nothing. You gave yourself a second chance. Something in her words unsettled him. People usually praised him for his empire, his billions, his control. She saw something different, the boy beneath the scars, not just the man behind the fortune. And you? He asked suddenly. What brought you here? To me. To this arrangement. Her heart hammered. She could have lied, deflected, but the candlelight made honesty easier. My mother. She's sick. The treatments are expensive. I signed because I couldn't watch her fade without fighting for her. Cassian's jaw tightened. He had expected ambition, not sacrifice. You married me to save her. Yes, she said simply. The room went quiet again, but this time the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with a fragile weight of truth, with the spark of two lives colliding in ways neither had expected. The storm raged outside, lightning flashing across the glass, but inside the penthouse, something softer stirred. For the first time, they weren't CEO and contract bride. They were just two people carrying scars. His etched in skin, hers etched in sacrifice. Cassian didn't say more that night. But when he left the table, he paused at the doorway, candlelight flickering across his face. Thank you for telling me, he said quietly. And for the first time, Leora felt as though the walls around him had shifted. Not fallen, but cracked just enough to let her see the man behind them. The storm lingered deep into the night, thunder growling across the skyline while the penthouse glowed only with scattered candles. Cassian moved through the rooms like a man caught between control and surrender. He poured another drink, but barely touched it, his thoughts circling back to Leora's quiet confession about her mother. When he returned to the living room, she was curled on the sofa, knees drawn close, watching the rain streak down the glass. She looked smaller than usual, fragile even, though there was a stubborn steadiness in her eyes. You should get some rest, Cassian said, voice low. I can't sleep when storms hit like this, she replied, hugging her sweater tighter. They remind me of long nights when I was younger, nights when we had nothing but each other to hold on to. Her honesty caught him off guard again. Cassian wasn't used to intimacy built from words. Most women in his orbit had wanted status, gifts, or polished charm. But Leora spoke of memories, of vulnerability, things that couldn't be bought. He sat across from her, setting the untouched glass on the table. For a moment, neither spoke. The storm filled the silence. Then his eyes lingered on hers, steady, searching. Do you regret it? He asked suddenly. She frowned slightly. Regret what? Signing that contract. Standing next to me that day. Her lips parted, then closed again. She took a slow breath before answering. I regret why I had to do it, but not that it was you. The words slipped from her like a truth she hadn't meant to reveal. Cassian's chest tightened. He leaned forward, the scar on his jaw catching the candlelight, his gaze locked on her. Leora. His voice trailed, heavy with something unspoken. For a heartbeat, the world outside ceased. The storm, the city, the endless weight of boardrooms, all of it vanished. Only the space between them remained. Cassian leaned closer, his hand lifted slightly, hesitating in the air, then brushing gently against her cheek. Her breath caught at the warmth of his touch, so deliberate, so unlike the cold man she thought she had married. He stopped, inches from her lips, restraint gripping him. If I kiss you, he murmured, his voice rougher now, I don't think I'll be able to stop. Her pulse raced, her voice trembling but steady enough to carry the truth. Then don't stop. But instead of taking her immediately, he froze again when she whispered, almost afraid to be heard, "Cassian, I've never done this before." His eyes searched hers, disbelief flickering across his features. "Never?" She shook her head, cheeks flushed, gaze steady despite her trembling hands. "I've never been with anyone." Silence stretched, thick and weighted. Then Cassian's expression softened into something she hadn't expected, reverence. Not pity, not mockery, not conquest, but reverence. "You kept that for yourself," he said quietly, as if honoring a secret treasure. His thumb brushed her jaw with a gentleness that seemed foreign to a man of his stature. "And you're giving it to me?" Tears burned her eyes, though she blinked them back. "I don't want this to be just a contract. Not anymore." Cassian's restraint crumbled. He leaned in, capturing her lips with his, not as a CEO sealing a deal, but as a man breaking free of his walls. The kiss was slow, trembling, layered with both fear and hunger. She melted into it, her hands gripping the fabric of his shirt as if anchoring herself to the moment. When they finally parted, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "You have no idea what you've just done to me," he whispered. For the first time since the contract was signed, their marriage felt real, not bound by ink, but by the raw, fragile beginnings of love. "Family, did you feel that?" A kiss that changed everything, fragile, trembling, yet powerful enough to shift two lives. Let me pause here to ask you, have you ever seen love begin in the most unexpected way? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and make sure you've hit that like button and that subscribe button. The weeks after that storm night moved differently. Something had shifted between them. Cassian no longer treated Leora as an obligation, and she no longer walked the penthouse halls like a guest afraid to overstep. Their dinners were still quiet, but now the silence carried warmth instead of distance. Sometimes their hands brushed when reaching for a glass, sometimes their eyes lingered longer than either intended. For the first time since his divorce, Cassian found himself coming home earlier. He told himself it was coincidence, yet each evening he ended up at the penthouse, drawn to her presence more than the mountain of work waiting at Monarch Tower. And Leora, though still guarded, found herself smiling more, her laughter slipping out unexpectedly when he teased her in rare, dry humor. But beneath the fragile happiness, change stirred in ways neither of them expected. It started with little things. Leora woke one morning nauseous, blaming it on late dinners and nerves. Days later, she felt faint again in the elevator. At first she brushed it off, unwilling to voice her suspicions even to herself. But then came the morning when she stood at the bathroom sink, staring down at the test in her trembling hands. 2 pink lines. Her knees buckled, and she sank against the cool marble counter, breath catching in her throat. She had thought herself prepared for sacrifice, but this was more than she had bargained for. That evening she sat at dinner across from Cassian, her appetite gone, her heart racing. He noticed instantly. "You've barely touched your food," he said, eyes narrowing slightly. "You're pale again. What's wrong?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then forced the words out. "Cassian, I'm pregnant." The air between them shifted like the moment before a storm breaks. His fork froze midway to his plate, his sharp gaze locked on her face. For once, the man who always had answers, who always controlled every boardroom and every crisis, was silent. Pregnant. The word rang in his ears, louder than thunder. He had imagined every outcome of their contract: public stability, private distance, maybe even quiet companionship. But not this. Not the thought of a child born from something that wasn't supposed to be real. Leora mistook his silence for disapproval. Her voice shook as she added, "I didn't plan this, I swear. I know this wasn't part of the agreement. If you want me to leave, stop." His tone was sharper than he intended, and her eyes widened in alarm. Cassian exhaled, running a hand over his jaw, the scar catching in the candlelight. He had never looked more conflicted. Finally, he pushed his chair back and stood. Slowly, deliberately, he circled the table and came to stand beside her. His hand, steady now, rested on the back of her chair. "You're carrying my child," he said quietly. She looked up at him, uncertain. "Yes." He lowered himself to one knee beside her, something no one in his world had ever seen him do. Gently, he placed his hand over her stomach, eyes locked on hers. Then this changes everything. For the first time, the walls Cassian had built, walls stronger than steel and taller than Monarch Tower itself, cracked completely. He didn't see her as a contract anymore, or himself as a man protecting his empire. He saw only the fragile beginnings of a family he thought he'd never have. Leora's eyes filled with tears. She placed her hand over his, whispering, "I was afraid you'd send me away." He shook his head, his voice steady now. "You're not going anywhere. Not you. Not our child." The vow hung in the room, heavier and more binding than any contract his lawyers had drafted. For the first time in years, Cassian Ward wasn't thinking about mergers, investors, or profits. He was thinking about a future that terrified him, but also one that he suddenly wanted more than anything. News traveled quickly in Monarch Tower. Cassian had told no one, but secrets had a way of bleeding through locked doors. A missed appointment here, a medical visit there. It wasn't long before the whispers began. "The new Mrs. Ward is expecting." Convenient, isn't it? She's secured her place now. By the time Cassian entered the boardroom for the quarterly review, the atmosphere was different. The directors' smiles were too sharp, their voices too casual. They asked questions about projections, mergers, overseas accounts, all routine, but their eyes kept straying toward him, searching, measuring. Finally, one of them, a silver-haired man with a habit of drumming his fingers on the table, leaned forward. "Cassian, there are rumors about your wife." Cassian's jaw tightened. "What rumors?" "That she's carrying your child." The man's tone was carefully neutral, but the implication wasn't. "We must consider what this means for the company's image. Investors might view it as—" He paused, choosing the cruelest word possible. "Entrapment." The table murmured in agreement, papers rustling as if the accusation carried weight. Cassian's eyes darkened. He straightened in his seat, the scar along his jaw stark under the boardroom lights. "My wife is not a strategy, she is not a liability, and I will not have her discussed in this room as though she were either—" A younger director cleared her throat carefully. "With respect, perception shapes value, Cassian. If people believe she married you for security and then anchored herself with a pregnancy, it could—" "Enough." His voice cracked like thunder, silencing the table. But even as the board fell quiet, the whispers spread beyond those walls. In corridors, in elevators, among employees who barely knew Leora, the narrative twisted. At a charity gala that weekend, the rumors became unavoidable. Leora stood by Cassian's side, her hand steady on his arm, but the stares pricked like needles. She caught fragments of conversation as women in glittering gowns passed by. "She's clever. I'll give her that. From analyst to Mrs. Ward, what a climb. Pregnant already." Of course, each word sliced deeper, and though she held her chin high, her heart trembled. When Cassian stepped away to speak with an investor, Leora slipped out to the balcony for air. The city sprawled before her, glittering, indifferent. She pressed her hands against the railing, fighting back the sting of tears. "Do you regret it?" The voice came low, familiar. She turned. Cassian stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Do you regret standing next to me?" he asked, softer now. She shook her head. "I regret that people can't see past the paper, that they think this child is a trick." He crossed to her, every step purposeful, and stopped so close she could feel the warmth of him. "Let them talk, they don't define us, and I should have silenced it the moment it began." Her lips trembled into a sad smile. "You can't silence whispers, Cassian." He lifted her chin with 2 fingers, forcing her to meet his eyes. "No, but I can make sure they never touch you again." The promise in his voice wasn't businesslike. It wasn't contractual. It was protective, fierce, and personal. For the first time in public, he leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead, holding it there long enough for the doors behind them to swing open and for half the gala to see. Inside the ballroom, the whispers stopped, but only for a moment. Outside, In the glow of the city lights, Leora closed her eyes, knowing this was only the beginning of the storm. The rumors hadn't faded, they had multiplied. Cassian's rivals at Corin Holdings saw opportunity in the whispers. A CEO distracted, a wife under scrutiny, and now the hint of scandal surrounding a pregnancy? It was fuel for exploitation. It started small, anonymous emails leaked to journalists, suggesting Leora had manipulated her way into Ward Enterprises. A week later, confidential documents disappeared from a secure server, resurfacing online with subtle alterations that painted her as reckless with company data. Cassian had dealt with corporate warfare before, but this was different. The attacks weren't aimed at him directly, they were aimed at her. One night, he returned to the penthouse later than usual, his tie loosened, his eyes sharp with worry. Leora was in the living room, curled on the sofa with a book, though her expression betrayed distraction. She looked up immediately when he entered. "You're late," she said softly. He set his briefcase down harder than he meant to. Security flagged something tonight. They traced one of the leaks to someone inside Monarch Tower, and whoever's behind it is trying to pin the blame on you. Her book slipped from her hands. "Me? But I would never." "I know." His voice softened, firm but protective. "I know you wouldn't. But perception matters, and they're counting on me losing control. If investors start believing you're a liability, they'll come for you," she finished, her voice trembling. "They already have." For the first time since signing that contract, fear wrapped tight around her. Not fear of him, not fear of whispers, but fear that the life they'd only just begun to build was under attack. 2 days later, the threat became tangible. Leora left the office late, her bag heavy with files. The streets were slick with rain, the city restless. She didn't notice the black sedan parked across from the building until she reached the curb. Its headlights flickered once, and a man in a hooded jacket stepped out, too quickly, too close. "Mrs. Ward?" His voice was low, taunting. Word of advice: step away from Monarch Tower before you get burned. Her breath caught. She backed up, heart pounding, but the man moved closer, his smirk cruel. "Your husband might be untouchable, but you're just leverage." Before panic could seize her completely, a second car screeched to a halt. Cassian's head of security jumped out, shoving the man back with practiced precision. "Get in the car, Mrs. Ward." Leora stumbled into the back seat, her pulse racing, tears threatening. The sedan pulled away fast, leaving the hooded man glaring on the wet street. By the time she reached the penthouse, Cassian was waiting, jaw tight, his scar more pronounced under the dim lights. He crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms with a force that shook them both. "They came after you," he muttered, his voice breaking in a way she had never heard before. She clung to him, her hands trembling. "They said I was leverage." His grip tightened, as if he could shield her from the world by sheer will. "No one touches you. Not while I breathe." In that moment, Cassian Ward wasn't just a CEO defending his empire. He was a man holding the only woman who had ever mattered enough to pierce his walls, and the child she carried. The penthouse was silent, except for the storm of Cassian's pacing. His fists clenched and unclenched as he replayed the scene his head of security had described. A man daring to corner Leora, daring to speak her name like she was nothing more than bait. Rage burned hot beneath his skin, but fear burned hotter. Leora sat on the edge of the sofa, still pale, her hands resting protectively over her stomach. When she looked at him, her eyes weren't filled with blame, they were filled with something heavier. Vulnerability, trust. "I never wanted to put you at risk," she whispered. Cassian stopped pacing. He crossed the room, dropping to his knees before her, the same way he had the night she told him about the baby. His hands framed her face, rough palms trembling against her skin. "You are not the risk," he said fiercely. "You are the reason I'd burn the world if I had to." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she leaned into his touch. "You can't fight everyone, Cassian. Watch me." His voice cracked, not from arrogance, but from the raw need to protect. And then he kissed her. Not the restrained brush of lips they had shared before, not the trembling first kiss of discovery. This was hunger sharpened by fear, by almost losing her. His mouth claimed hers with desperate urgency, and she responded with equal fire, her hands gripping his shoulders, pulling him closer. He lifted her effortlessly, carrying her down the hall, no longer caring about restraint or contracts or what was expected of him. Tonight, there was no board, no rivals, no whispers. There was only her. In the privacy of their bedroom, Cassian laid her down gently, reverently, as though she were both fragile and the strongest thing he had ever known. His lips traced the path of her tears, his hands steadying her trembling body. "Tell me to stop," he murmured against her skin, though his own control was slipping fast. She shook her head, voice breaking with truth. "Don't stop. Not tonight." And so he didn't. What began in fear transformed into something fierce and consuming. Every touch was a promise, every kiss a vow, every breathless whisper a confession he hadn't spoken. Aloud, that she was no longer his obligation, no longer his contract, but his everything. By the time dawn bled through the glass walls of the penthouse, they were tangled in each other, exhaustion softened by peace. Cassian held her close, his scarred jaw resting against her hair, his arms wrapped tightly as if anchoring himself to her. For the first time in years, he slept without nightmares. For the first time in her life, Leora woke feeling safe. The world outside still plotted, whispered, and schemed. But inside those walls, something unshakable had taken root. Cassian Ward had faced hostile investors, hostile governments, even hostile markets, but standing at the podium of Monarch Tower's press hall, with cameras flashing and reporters, clawing for answers, he knew this moment would define not just his company, but his family. Behind him, the Ward Enterprises emblem gleamed. In front of him, rows of journalists waited, pens poised, recorders blinking red. The air was thick with anticipation. Everyone had heard the rumors, that his wife was a fraud, that she had trapped him with a child, that Ward Enterprises was cracking from within. Cassian adjusted the microphone, his presence commanding silence. His scar caught the spotlight, a reminder of survival, but tonight his voice carried more weight than scars or numbers. "There have been whispers," he began, his tone steady, deliberate. "Whispers about my wife, about our child, about the family we are building." A ripple moved through the crowd, cameras clicking furiously. Cassian let them stir before he continued. "I built this company on truth and resilience, and I will not let lies undo it. The documents leaked, the rumors spread, all of it was manufactured." By whom? He held up a folder, thick with evidence, his hand unwavering. "By Corin Holdings, our supposed rivals, who orchestrated a campaign not only against me but against my wife, Leora Ward." He slammed the folder onto the podium, the sound echoing through the hall. "Here are the records of payments to false informants. Here are the doctored files planted to discredit her. This was not business. This was an attack on my family." The room erupted. Reporters shouting questions, flashes strobing like lightning. Cassian lifted a hand, commanding order. His next words cut through the chaos. "My wife is not a liability. She is not a pawn. She is the strongest woman I know, and she carries my child, our future. If anyone in this city, in this market, or in this world doubts her place by my side, let me make it clear. She is my heart, and I will stand by her for the rest of my life." Gasps rippled across the hall. For a man known for his cold efficiency, Cassian's words landed with seismic force. This was not the language of contracts or quarterly reports. This was love, raw and unshakable, declared before the world. Leora stood just beyond the curtain, her hand pressed to her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. She hadn't known what he would say, hadn't expected him to bear himself so openly, but hearing it, seeing the way the world reacted, she realized he had just given her more than protection. He had given her his name, his company, and his heart, all in one strike. By the time Cassian left the podium, the narrative had shifted. The scandal belonged to Corin Holdings now. Ward Enterprises stood untarnished, stronger than before, and for the first time, Cassian Ward walked away from a press hall not as a ruthless CEO, but as a husband who had claimed his wife before the world. The seasons shifted, and with them, the rhythm of Cassian and Leora's life. The press conference had changed everything, not only silencing whispers, but cementing Cassian's place beside her as more than a shield. For months, he had stood firm at her side, no longer hiding affection behind contracts or caution. And then came the day that tested them in a new way. It was just past dawn when Leora woke with sharp pains low in her belly. The city was still quiet, the skyline bathed in muted pink light. Cassian had fallen asleep in the chair beside her bed, a habit he'd picked up as her pregnancy advanced, unwilling to leave her side for more than a few hours. Her gasp broke his sleep instantly. "What is it?" His voice was hoarse, alarm flashing across his scarred features. She clutched his hand, breath quickening. "It's time." Within the hour, the penthouse was a flurry of motion. The driver rushed them to the hospital. Security cleared corridors. Doctors hurried to prepare. Yet in the midst of all the chaos, Cassian stayed locked on her, his hand never leaving hers. "You're not alone," he whispered against her forehead. Not for 1 second. Hours stretched into what felt like eternity. Leora's cries echoed through the sterile room, sweat dampening her hair, her fingers gripping Cassian's with desperate strength. He had faced hostile takeovers, near bankruptcy, even threats to his life, but nothing had terrified him like watching her fight to bring their children into the world. And then, finally, 2 cries split the air. Twin girls, tiny, wrinkled, red-faced, but alive, healthy, perfect. The nurses wrapped them carefully and handed one to Leora, the other to Cassian. For a moment, the ruthless CEO sat motionless, staring down at the impossibly small life cradled in his arms. His chest tightened, his throat burned, and before he could stop it, tears blurred his vision. Leora, exhausted but glowing, turned her head toward him. "They have your eyes." Cassian shook his head softly. "No, they have our future." In that room, there were no contracts, no boardrooms, no rivals. Just a man, a woman, and the family they never thought they'd have. Weeks later, as they settled into the quiet chaos of parenthood, Cassian often found himself awake. At night, pacing with one daughter against his chest, while the other slept in Leora's arms. The city still hummed outside their glass walls, but inside, everything was different. He had once thought strength meant control, isolation, and dominance. Now he understood it meant something else entirely, holding his daughters close at 3 in the morning, listening to Leora's soft laughter when they cried in unison, knowing that for the first time in years his life wasn't about survival. It was about living. On a quiet Sunday, Leora curled against him on the sofa, the twins asleep in their bassinets nearby. Her hand found his, their fingers intertwining. "Do you ever think about how it started? That cold contract?" Cassian let out a low laugh, his lips brushing her hair. "Every day. And every day, I thank God the contract wasn't the end. It was the beginning." She tilted her head to look at him. "We turn paper into love." "No," he corrected gently, kissing her forehead. "You turned my walls into a home." The moral of their story wasn't found in wealth, contracts, or corporate power. It was found in trust, in sacrifice, in the courage to love after betrayal. Cassian and Leora had discovered that families weren't built on agreements, but on choices, made every single day, choices to forgive, to protect, and to love without fear. And so the man once scarred by betrayal, and the woman who once signed away her freedom for survival, found something neither of them had dared to hope for, a love that lasted, and a family that would outlive every whisper. Family, thank you for staying with me through this story. What began as a cold contract became a reminder that love can grow even in the most unexpected places. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit the like button, drop a comment below, and share it with someone who could use a little hope today. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Mr. Hearthline Stories and turn on the notification bell so you'll be the first to know when our next story arrives. This family is built on love, on courage, and on second chances. I can't wait to welcome you back for the next story we'll share together. Until then, take care of yourselves. And remember, here at Hearthline, you'll always have a family waiting for you.